Challenger!
Welcome viewer. This is the fourth video in this series where I debunk a bunch of flat earth proof from the channel Is Babel from Heaven? Is the Earth a Globe? This video will be different than the other debunking videos, as today we'll be talking about various stories. So let's jump into it.
Flat Earth Proof 9. The Authorities. The year is 1954, and Admiral Richard Byrd has just returned from his latest Antarctic expedition. Enthusiastically, he speaks of an unexplored land, quote, beyond the South Pole, as big as the United States. Calling it the future of the nation, he further touts it as being the most valuable and important place in the world for science, an untouched reservoir of untapped resources, including coal, oil, minerals, and uranium. Now, remember that these are the 1950s, and there are no environmental groups to argue sustainability. The world is the businessman's oyster, and the future is looking very promising.
Oh, I love stories. I have one for you. Beginning in 1821, the city of London was overrun with reports of a previously unknown nation nestled in the Caribbean coastline called Poyais, a lush and untapped paradise of fertile farmland, rolling hills, and gold-rich streams. Its native Poyais were described as a friendly and hard-working people, and its capital, St. Joseph, was a European-style settlement dotted with public buildings and even an opera house. Poyais boasted a deep-water port and a pleasant climate that made it immune to the scourge of tropical disease. It was, a guidebook claimed, one of the most healthy and beautiful spots in the world. I bet some of you are wondering, how come you have never heard of this place? Well, once it was discovered, the wealthy of the world carved it up for themselves. Due to the immunity from common diseases, it became vital to hide it from general population, so only a selected few could benefit. Obviously, aircraft and such had to be rerouted while ensuring it doesn't appear on any world map. With state-of-the-art technology, this nation is guarded and defended by the deep state. Or maybe it was a fairy tale, perpetrated by a gallant Scottish adventurer with a colorful past called Gregor MacGregor. It all started back in 1820, when MacGregor convinced a native Indian king to grant him some 8 million acres of territory along Central America's Mosquito Coast. The plot was little more than an undeveloped jungle, yet by time he returned to London the following year, MacGregor had reinvented it as the obscure but prosperous nation of Poyais. He claimed he was the country's Kazakh or prince and announced that he had returned to Europe on a mission to solicit investments and recruit prospective settlers. It didn't take long for His Highness Gregor to become a fixture in London's high society. A wealthy aristocrat set him and his wife up in a country estate, and the city's Lord Mayor held a banquet in his honor. MacGregor inspired trust by using charm and citing his past military achievement, which he greatly exaggerated. But he also came armed with a series of official documents, nearly all of which were fabricated. After drumming up interest in his country, MacGregor cashed in by floating a £200,000 sterling Poyais bond in the London money market. He also started peddling land and titles to would-be colonists. The con reached its high water mark in September 1822, when a ship called the Honduras Packet set sail from London with several dozen Poyais-bound pilgrims. 4 months later, a second ship carried nearly 200 more settlers out of Leith, Scotland. Most of the aspiring Poyais had invested their entire life savings in the journey. Some had even converted all their cash to Poyais dollars. which MacGregor had begun printing in Scotland. Yet, after being deposited on the coast of Central America, the passengers made a startling discovery. Not only was there no capital of St. Joseph, there seemed to be no Poyais at all. Instead of the settlement they had been promised, they only found miles and miles of dense, insect-infected jungle. It wasn't long before malaria and other diseases spread through the confused settlers. Help finally arrived in May 1823 in the form of a British ship from a nearby colony in Belize. The surviving Poyais were evacuated. Of the roughly 250 immigrants that had left England and Scotland, 2/3 eventually died from tropical diseases. Even after the first Poyais survivors returned home, MacGregor still wasn't brought to justice. His supporters even defended him in the press and argued that the colony's failure must have been the fault of his agents and collaborators. In the autumn of 1823, the Kazakh quietly fled England and set up shop in Paris, where he attempted to repeat the Poyais con all over again. Despite his brush with law, MacGregor continued promoting his Poyais scheme and continued getting away with it for another decade. In 1827, he resurfaced in London and issued a new £800,000 bond. The following year, he once again started selling bogus Poyais land certificates. MacGregor finally retired his mythical country in the late 1830s and took off for Venezuela, which had awarded him a full military pension for his participation in its wars of independence. The Kazakh of Poyais died there in 1845, having never been found guilty of a single crime. What does MacGregor has to do with flat Earth? Nothing. I thought we were telling tales. But in all seriousness, I can't be the only one seeing the parallel.
And then a meeting was held between the nations eagerly awaiting to slice Antarctica up like apple pie, with all signatories agreeing to no colonization of Antarctica. In 1959, the Antarctic Treaty was enacted, barring any independent exploration of Antarctica by the public, with no revisions until the year 2041.
That was such an awful false narrative of what really happened. This kind of bugs me that all flat earthers talk about Antarctic Treaty without even trying to find out what it is about. Well, not to worry. Can we go through it? So, the 5 W's, but not in the traditional sequence. First, why? Well, simply, conflict. Let's start with Inter-American Treaty of Reciprocal Assistance, commonly known as the Riot Treaty. It was an agreement signed in 1947 in Rio de Janeiro among many countries of the Americas. The central principle contained in its articles is that an attack against one is to be considered an attack against them all. This was known as the Hemispheric Defense Doctrine. The treaty was initially created in 1947 and came into force in 1948. The Bahamas was the most recent country to sign and ratify it in 1982. The video will ask if there are any other international treaties that has lasted as long. The answer is yes, like this one. On September 2, 1947, the American quadrant of Antarctica between 24° west and 90° west was included as a part of the security zone of this Riot Treaty, committing its members to defend in case of external aggression. On August 28, 1948, the United States proposed to the claimants some form of internalizations of Antarctica with the support of the United Kingdom. Chile responded by presenting a plan to suspend any Antarctic claim for 5 to 10 years while negotiating a final solution, which did not prosper. Next US proposal was that Antarctica to be under the guardianship of the United Nations as a trust administered by Argentina, Australia, Chile, France, United States, United Kingdom, and New Zealand. Still, the idea was rejected by Argentina, Australia, Chile, France, and Norway. Before the rejection, the interest of the United States to keep the Soviet Union away from Antarctica was frustrated when in 1950, this country informed the claimants that it would not accept any Antarctic agreement in which it has not been represented. The fear that the USSR would react by doing a territorial claim, transferring the Cold War to Antarctica, led the United States to do none. In 1950, the International Council of Scientific Unions discussed the possibility of holding a third International Polar Year, a collaborative international effort with intensive research focusing on the polar regions. This idea was then extended to the entire planet, thus creating the International Geophysical Year, or IGY, that took place between July 1, 1957 and December 31, 1958. In this event, 66 countries participated. Both Argentina and Chile expressed that researching during the International Geophysical Year would not give any territorial rights to the participants, and that the facilities that were erected during that year should be dismantled at the end of it. After the United States proposed to extend the Antarctic investigations for another year, in February 1958, the Soviet Union reported that it would maintain its scientific basis until the studies that were carried out were completed. Scientific bases increased in international tension concerning Antarctica, and the danger of the Cold War spreading to that continent caused Dwight Eisenhower, the President of the United States, to convene an Antarctic conference to the 12 countries active in Antarctica during the IGY to sign a treaty. In the first phase, representatives of the 12 nations met in Washington to define the basic negotiation framework. Still, no consensus was reached on a preliminary draft. In the second phase, a conference of the highest diplomatic level was held from October 15th to December 1st, 1959, the date of the signing of the treaty. The central ideas was full acceptance were the freedom of scientific research in Antarctica and the peaceful use of the continent. Still, their demilitarization and the maintenance of the status quo also had consensus. The positions of the United States, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and New Zealand coincided in the establishment of an international administration for Antarctica, proposing the latter to be within the framework of the United Nations. Australia and the United Kingdom expressed the need for inspections by observers, and the second proposed the use of military means for logistic functions. Argentina proposed that all atomic explosions to be banned in Antarctica, which caused a crisis that lasted until the eve of the forum, since the United States, along with other countries, intended to ban only those that were made without prior notice and without prior consultation. The support of the USSR and Chile to the Argentinian proposal finally caused the United States to retract its opposition. The signing of the treaty was the first arms control agreement that occurred in the framework of the Cold War, and the complaining countries managed to avoid the internationalization of Antarctic sovereignty. That was a short summary of why, who, when, and where. So what is in this treaty? The following text was adopted at the Antarctic Treaty Consultative Meeting in Peru, May-June 1999, as an introduction to the Antarctic Treaty, particularly for the intending visitors to the Antarctic. There are few places in the world where there has never been war, where the environment is fully protected, and where scientific research has priority. But there is a whole continent like this. It is the land the Antarctic Treaty Parties call a natural reserve devoted to peace and science. At the southern end of our world, those who share the challenges of distant and cold to visit the ice-bound continent have developed a tradition of warm cooperation. Such cooperation, unique on this scale, is cemented by the Antarctic Treaty. As a visitor to Antarctica, you will be privileged to enter this world. This document will tell you a little about the Antarctic Treaty, and why it is a unique agreement for a unique place. There are 14 articles in this treaty. I'll run down some of the bullet points. No military use shall be made of Antarctica, though military personnel and equipment may be used for peaceful purposes. There will be complete freedom of scientific investigation. Antarctic treaty nations will exchange plans for their scientific programs. Scientific data will be freely available, and scientists will be exchanged between expeditions where practical. Territorial claims will be on hold. Antarctica cannot be used for testing nuclear weapons. Neither is Antarctica to be used for the disposal of nuclear waste. The treaty applies to all land and ice shelves south of 60 degrees south, but not to the seas. All Antarctic stations and all ships and aircraft supplying Antarctica shall be open to inspectors from any treaty nation. Treaty nations must inform all other of the expeditions, ship movements, stations, and if any military personnel or equipment is taken to Antarctica. Antarctica does not belong to any one nation or group of nations. When you are in Antarctica, you are not in any country and therefore not subject to the laws of any other country. You are, however, subject to the laws of your own country. The treaty is not fixed. It can be changed at any time by member nations. Changes must be suggested by members and agreed unanimously by the others. The current treaty will end in 2048, at which point it may continue with or without major modifications, be replaced or be discarded. Any activity relating to mineral resources other than scientific research shall be prohibited. All activities in Antarctica have to be measured in terms of the impact on the environment that they will have, with other alternatives being considered. This includes visit by tourist ships. For things that will have a large impact, such as buildings of a new research station where there isn't one, this has to be very thorough and submitted to a committee for approval before starting work. Prevention of marine pollution. The discharge of all waste substances from ships is regulated, despite the treaty applying only to the land and ice shelves and not otherwise to the sea. This includes oily mixture, noxious liquid substances, plastics, and general waste. Protection of all living things in Antarctica is a basic part of the treaty. The potential threats must be evaluated in advance and alternatives given. Any plans that deliberately involve taking or harmfully interfering with living things require the submission of an application for a permit to do so. There are a number of threatened species that are more specifically protected. Steps must also be taken to prevent the introduction of non-native species. Soil cannot be taken to Antarctica, for instance, and boots and clothing must be cleaned of potential seeds and spores from elsewhere that may be accidentally carried there. Finally, some areas are given an additional level of protection beyond the already considerable environmental protection that applies across the Antarctic under the Madrid Protocol. Couple of these points were not on the original agreement and had been ratified over time. As you can see, there are some regulations. We all understand that, right?
Although independent explorers such as Jarle Andhøy have attempted independent access to Antarctica, as they've approached the southern latitudes, they've been met by armed ships threatening to open fire on them if they didn't turn around and go back.
Ah, Jarle Andhøy. Hey, does anyone mind if I tell you guys the real story? Jarle Andhøy is a Norwegian adventurer and sailing skipper. His first major voyage was in 1996-97 and wrote a book about his voyage entitled Alone Around Cape Horn. In June 2002, Andhøy and two others sailed to the Arctic in another Albin Vega called Berserk II. Their goal was to sail in the path of Othre, the Viking chief, and to sail as far as possible north towards the Arctic ice. Immediately after returning to Longyearbyen, in Svalbard, the governor charged Andhøy as the skipper with sailing without insurance and for failing to submit a route plan. Additionally, Andhøy had released a television series which documented their voyage. Using their own documentary as evidence, the governor charged the trio with a number of environmental crimes, including unauthorized landings in protected areas and provoking a polar bear. In July 2004, Andhøy and Rosen attempted to continue the voyage. However, the Norwegian police and Coast Guard attempted to stop them since they believed Mercy, who was still wanted in connection with the previous environmental charge, was also aboard. In order to avoid further attention from the Norwegian authority, the expedition continued towards Russia. In the summer of 2007, Andhøy undertook a new expedition to explore the Northwest Passage with a larger crew, amongst them Mercy and Frederick Jewell. However, in early July, two of the crew, including Jewell, were arrested by the Canadian authority. In August, Andhøy was also arrested by the Canadian authority for attempting to smuggle Jewell back into Canada after he had been denied permission following the previous arrest. Andhøy published his account of the voyage in another book, Berserk Through the Northwest Passage, and a NRK television series of the same name. In 2007, Andhøy tried to transit in Canada's Northwest Passage to prepare another broadcast, but were denied by Canadian border officials as two of Berserk's 5 crew were inadmissible to Canada due to prior criminal convictions. In the winter of 2011, during an expedition to the South Pole, Berserk activated its emergency transponder with 3 people on board. At the time, Jarle Andhøy and one of his crewmates, Samuel Messi, was driving ATVs towards the pole. An extensive search was concluded on 1st of March 2011, with all 3 crew members presumed dead. Once again, Jarle Andhøy was traveling without any permits or insurance, for which he was charged by the Norwegian Polar Institute. Yes, and we haven't even got to Chile event yet. In January 2012, the New Zealand Customs Service mounted a search for the sailing yacht Nilaya after suspecting that Andhøy and Messi would again sail to Antarctica illegally. Andhøy had told the Norwegian ministry of his plans, but had not obtained the required permits from Norway. According to the authorities, Andhøy had also entered New Zealand illegally on his way southwards because he had not declared his previous deportation from Canada. It was also illegal to leave New Zealand's water, as he did, without custom clearance. Also on board were Samuel Messi, a Russian, an Argentine, and an unknown New Zealand stowaway. The Nilaya successfully reached the area where Berserk was lost. But after a fruitful search, Andhøy set course for Argentina to avoid consequence in New Zealand. After sustaining minor damage, the vessel headed to Chile to seek help with repairs and fuel. In Puerto Williams, Chile, the Nilaya was then detained by the Chilean Navy because she gave a false name when contacted by radio. Chilean authorities were also aware that a stowaway New Zealand citizen lacked a passport, and it was unclear if he was there on his own free will. The crew presented the vessel as being both Russian and Norwegian flagged, and she was flying a pirate flag when she was detained. Andhøy returned to Norway in May 2012 and was fined by Norway for violating environmental and reporting provisions of the Antarctic Treaty during his 2012 exploits. Well, he's kind of a celebrity in Norway. They called him the Rebel Viking. I can see the appeal of that. Old days where they would sail and slaughter and burn and pillage. Good times. Well, newsflash. Those days are long gone. And from what happened, would you really say he was denied?
There are only 3 entry points to Antarctica sanctioned by the Antarctic Treaty, through which civilians may enter and tour Antarctica, but only under the supervision of pre-planned tours.
Really? Well, first let's look at the easy way, flying. On the screen you can see some flight routes you can take. I can fly from Cape Town, Ushuaia and Punta Arenas, Dunedin and Hobart. And I can count at least 4 landing zones quite separated from one another. The flights from New Zealand and Australia lands near Mount Erebus, one from Cape Town all the way to Pole, route from Punta Arenas lands on the Union Glacier Camp, and the one from Ushuaia lands near King George's Island. So I count 4 entry points using flights only. So I guess the 3 entry point comment is also a lie. Do you even need to look at ship routes?
To date, over 50 nations have signed on to the Antarctic Treaty, which to this day remains unbreached. Now, has any other treaty between industrialized nations lasted so long?
Yes, as I mentioned Rio Treaty earlier. Also, the treaty has been ratified many times over the years.
Furthermore, as rocket science was also a quickly expanding field at the time, it only followed that the authorities seized control over the aeronautic industry before private enterprises were able to venture high enough and disclose the globe deception. With the establishment of NASA, the space program was militarized, and all the best and brightest scientists and engineers were then recruited and compartmentalized by this government agency.
Knock knock. Who's there? Other countries that have space programs. As of 2019, 11 countries have had the capability to send objects into orbit using their own launch vehicles. And I would agree that space program would attract the best and the brightest. I don't think flat earthers would ever qualify. There are also private sectors who had either launched or in development. We have SpaceX, NGIS and such.
The lunar missions were aptly named after Apollo, as their prime purpose was to reinforce the heliocentric paradigm in that both the Earth and the Moon are orbs orbiting the Sun.
I will admit, I love mythology. In fact, that was my favorite book to read to my little one when she was born. Apollo is one of the Olympian deities in classic Greek and Roman mythology. The national divinity of the Greeks, Apollo has been recognized as a god of archery, music and dance, truth and prophecy, healing and diseases, the sun and light, poetry and more. The symbol mostly attached to Apollo is a laurel wreath. You also have common raven, python, bow and arrow, and the musical instrument that I can't pronounce. A lyre? Now I am confused how you jump from Apollo to orbs to orbiting heliocentric model. That is an utter non sequitur. In reality, NASA Director Silverstein chose the name Apollo after perusing a book of mythology one evening in 1960. He said the image of Apollo riding his chariot across the sun was appropriate to the grand scale of the proposed program.
In reality, the rocket launches are merely a spectacle, with all launches curving off and falling back to Earth, out of view, and the images they've fed us, faked, composited, or downright computer-generated.
The mentalist in me is urging me to ignore this point here. I'm sure there will be a video by Babel from heaven that would talk about photos and videos being faked. So we will tackle it then.
But the authorities have in fact known what the real map looks like, and they've managed to keep most navigators, astronomers, and the populace unaware behind the globe and celestial sphere, not to mention Mercator's projection. But the United States Geological Survey, or USGS for short, the prime atlas and map makers of the world, have been using a completely different map, the Azimuthal Equidistant projection.
So here is the problem. We have a 3D object that we are trying to represent on a 2D plane, and it is simply not possible. Every flat map misrepresents the surface of the Earth in some way. There are 4 basic elements: directions, distances, areas, and shapes. A flat map can show one or more, but never all. I can find at least 70 different kind of map projections, but they can all be classified into 3 types: mnemonic projection, stereographic projection, and orthographic projection, each with its own pros and cons. If the Earth was flat, we would have only one projection, but I digress. This video talked about USGS, so let's see what they have to say. Different projections have different uses. Some projections are used for navigation, while other projections show better representations of the true relative sizes of the continents. The USGS map projections poster summarizes and compares 18 common map projections and their uses. Neat! They have a PDF that we can download. Awesome! Let's look at Azimuthal equidistance, shall we? Oh dear. Used by USGS. I guess the video wasn't lying after all. I am defeated. Useful for showing airline distances from center point of projection. Useful for seismic and radio work. Okay. Well, it is a searchable PDF. Do I dare search for used by USGS? It's only one page, so I might as well read that damn thing. Oh, look at this. Transverse marketor, used by USGS. Distances are true only along the central meridian selected by the mapmaker. Space oblique marketor. This new space-age conformal projection was developed by the USGS for use in Landsat images, sinusoidal equal area, used frequently in atlases to show distribution patterns, used by the USGS to show prospective hydrocarbon provinces and sedimentary basins of the world. Orthographic, used for perspective views of the Earth, Moon, and other planets. The Earth appears as it would on a photograph from deep space, used by USGS in the National Atlas of the United States of America. Stereographic, used by USGS for maps of Antarctica and American Geographical Society for Arctic and Antarctic maps. Lambert's azimuthal equal area, used by the USGS in its National Atlas and Circum-Pacific map series. Albert's equal area conic, used by USGS for maps showing the conterminous United States, 48 states, larger areas of the United States. Lambert conformal conic, used by USGS for many 7.5 and 15-minute topographic maps and for the State Basin map series. I'm glad that I didn't search for used by USGS. I would have missed a few. So, any more lies, dear Bible from heaven?
Which was developed and proposed 1,000 years ago by Al-Biruni, a Persian scholar who believed the earth was flat.
Okay, I'll give him this. The earliest text describing the azimuthal equidistance projection is an 11th century work by Al-Biruni. In his description of Shizi's astrolabe, he hints at contemporary debates over the movement of the earth. Also, he was a believer of Allah and Islam. So a channel named Bible from Heaven, referencing work of a Muslim scholar. But I'm guessing you're not willing to accept his belief on God. As far as we're concerned, both God and flat earth is a belief.
But hey, the authorities that shouldn't be love hiding their secrets in plain sight. So investigate the subject for yourself and ask questions.
Har har har. UNICEF uses azimuthal equidistance projection in their logo. That must mean something. Maybe because it's an easy representation of all the nations in a circular form, which fits better than rectangles? This is where I'll end this long video. Thank you for watching. If you have enjoyed this content so far, please drop a like and a comment, and maybe even subscribe to know of my latest uploads debunking the rest. That would be greatly appreciated and would help my small channel grow. Have a safe day. Signing off.